Hello and welcome to the third instalment of Politics Live, Upstart's live broadcast dedicated to bringing you the latest from the 2016 federal election. We're providing a running analysis of the campaign by recapping the news of the week and asking how the strategy of each party is playing out more broadly. I'm Rudy Edsel, your host. I'm joined by Uni Poll Watch student editor Matthew Almus.
Hey.
And joining us today is frankly no one. It's just the two of us. Naeem Kurt is lucky enough to be in Europe. I'm sure he's devastated about missing the nitty gritty of the election campaign. It's a tough life over there. And we had a couple of other replacements lined up, but you know how these things run. It all just sort of fell apart. So without further ado, we'll recap this week's headlines, starting with Monday when Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull dropped a campaign ad that focused heavily on his relationship with his father. The ad seemed to be trying to recalibrate Turnbull's image to be more relatable. We'll touch on that shortly. Meanwhile, opposition leader Bill Shorten was in Melbourne campaigning on Labor's $3 billion childcare policy, which they say will benefit every family on less than $150,000 a year. On Tuesday, the two leaders held a temporary ceasefire to visit the flood-affected regions of New South Wales, which led to some great photos of muddy dress shoes and suit pants, perhaps further underlining Turnbull's newfound status as man of the people. Meanwhile, the Liberal Party let slip the dogs of war in South Australia, with former PM and party heavyweight John Howard enlisted to help Jamie Briggs' campaign in the seat of Mayo. Howard made some incendiary comments about Nick Xenophon that would suggest the Liberal Party is probably a bit worried about his influence at the polls next month. We'll have more on that later too. The party leaders, innovative and agile as they are, also agreed to a live Facebook debate to be held at some point next week. On Wednesday, Labor finally released their policy costings, conceding to pressure from the coalition and media. And it's not pretty reading in the short term. Also making news on Wednesday was Bronwyn Bishop's claim that Andrew Bolt knew about her resignation before she did. That night, Malcolm Turnbull snubbed the Sky News People Forum in Sydney to go on 7:30, where Lee Sales grilled him on, you guessed it, jobs and growth. And at that forum, Bill Shorten reneged on his plan to ditch the tampon tax, saying that Australia can't afford it. On Thursday, Shorten and Turnbull went to Launceston to inspect the damage from the storms and resultant flooding there, with Turnbull saying that the government will pitch in 75% of the cleanup costs. Meanwhile, Liberal MP for Canning Andrew Hastie was sacked by the Australian Defence Force for continuing to campaign in uniform after being instructed not to. And today, Labor will be releasing a slate of new saving measures to help get the budget back to surplus. So, big week, Matt. What have you made of it so far?
Well, it's been a little bit of a weird week. We've seen with the floods going on, we've seen both leaders there's been a bit of pressure on them to suspend the campaigns, go out and visit the areas. There's been some funding promises from both leaders related to the cleanup effort and things like that. We even saw, coverage yesterday kind of tail off early as Malcolm Turnbull apparently didn't want to answer any political questions, trying not to politicise the flooding issue, even though that kind of politicized it in itself.
Everything's politicised in election campaign.
Well, when you're Malcolm Turnbull or Bill Shorten, I'm definitely sure it is. So most of the interesting stuff actually happened towards the start of the week, at least for the coalition. Malcolm Turnbull ran that ad. I'm pretty sure we got some footage of that as well.
Yeah, we've got a copy of that ad.
Well, most of my childhood I spent with my dad. He was a single father and we lived together, two guys, big brother, little brother really was the type of relationship. We were incredibly close. We didn't have much money. He was a hotel broker and for most of that time he was battling, like a lot of people are, a lot of single parents are certainly.
Yeah, so that ad, like I said in the intro, he's trying to sort of recalibrate his image as a man of the people, and he thinks that a relatable story about a single dad will probably do that. What do you think?
Yeah, well, Malcolm Turnbull's kind of been going on about this. His dad was a single dad and a bit of a battler for a little bit now. He mentioned it during the press gallery leaders debate, it's sort of Malcolm Turnbull trying to counter. Labor has put out a lot of messaging that he's seriously out of touch, that, he's from a top end of town, all this kind of thing, and he's trying to kind of combat that by kind of showing his more human side. It's been very interesting because the ad obviously got a lot of attention, but in a lot of ways for some of the wrong reasons. A lot of commentators saying that it's a bit of a canary in the coal mine for Malcolm Turnbull, who a month ago would have been expected never to do something like this, and who would have been expected just to run a standard campaign and just win the election. But Bill Shorten's come up from behind. He's been rising in the popularity polls for some time now, and Malcolm Turnbull has come under a bit of pressure to kind of try to sell himself as a man of the people, and that's certainly been prevalent this week, especially with that ad.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one for me. I come from a single parent family myself, and to be honest, I found it hard not to sort of to root for Malcolm and his dad. Like, just watching that ad, I was kind of, it's really well put together ad, and I was kind of going, I was putting myself in his dad's place and going, he's bloody prime minister now. Obviously his dad's kicked some goals and stuff. But it is, you're right. The cynical view of this perhaps is to look at it and say, oh, he's trying to leverage his past to appear more relatable.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think it's working. I think that specific word that they used, battler, that's not a mistake. That's not a clumsy word. That's a word that has a lot of resonance in Australia. I was reading an article the other day about how I think pretty much everyone in Australia considers themselves a battler, no matter how much money
middle class.
No matter how much money they sort of make. So that's canny marketing by the Liberal Party team there.
Yeah, it's certainly very interesting because on one hand, Malcolm Turnbull is trying to sell himself as this down to earth person that came from a family with a single father and who was a battler. But on the other hand, Malcolm Turnbull's a multimillionaire. He's a successful business person. So on the one hand, he's trying to appeal to, more of the traditional Liberal Party supporter base, that those business people and people like that. On the other hand, he's trying to appeal to, your average day Australian. So it's a bit of Harvey Two-Face in a lot of senses.
Yeah, you were pretty keen to use that Harvey Two-Face comment, weren't you? Don't forget, this is Upstart Live Upstart Politics Live, I should say, every Friday from our studios at 1 o'clock with Matthew Elmas and Rudy Etzel. He's been sort of trying to cultivate this image for some time, though. I think you've seen him he makes a big show out of using public transport and
Yeah, well, it's sort of been from day one. Malcolm Turnbull's, he gets on the trains, with everyday Australians. He takes the selfies. He does all that kind of stuff. But after a while, there was I think there's a pervasive feeling emerging that a lot of commentators have touched on. And it kind of feels just a little bit fake. Whereas I think Bill Shorten's kind of managed to turn his image from that kind of robotic kind of bureaucrat to this really relatable human being, and that's I think really helped him in the campaign.
Maybe the man boobs have worked for Shorten in that sense. Do you think the public want relatability from Malcolm Turnbull, or do you feel like maybe they want a little bit more authority and presence?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to remember that Malcolm Turnbull's not doing anything new in terms of political strategy. We saw, Kevin Rudd in 2007, he made a very similar ad talking about where he grew up and with his family trying to spruik the Gonski reforms. And so we've seen this before. This is typical messaging, but I think Malcolm Turnbull has tried to make it his own, personalise it a little bit more. And I think the reaction has certainly been mixed. We had Carolina Overington come out actually before the ad was released, and she was talking about Malcolm Turnbull and how the campaign's going more broadly. She's the associate editor at The Australian.
Yep.
And she was essentially saying that, look, Malcolm Turnbull is a master businessman. He's a successful businessman. He's a great strategist. He knows how to wait and when to strike. But Malcolm Turnbull, she said, does a lot better when he can tell people what to do and when he can be giving the orders. Whereas in an election campaign, you actually have to convince people. You can't just tell them to vote for you when they'll do it. You actually have to convince them to vote for you. And she made the point that Bill Shorten may be better at campaigning, that he may be better at getting out there and actually convincing people, getting onto a relatable level and talking to people about not just what matters to them, but in a way that they believe what he's trying to say and the message he's trying to get out.
So do you think maybe Turnbull should be aiming for a more sort of paternal image rather than a boot, pulling himself up by the boots?
Yeah. Well, another point that Caroline made is one a lot of other commentators have been making. Laura Tingle made this point during the press gallery debate, is Malcolm Turnbull is very much a person caught between a rock and a hard place in his party. He came into leadership after rolling Tony Abbott, and that's continued on to put him in a very precarious position with the right of his party. He has to kind of please people around the board, and so what you're seeing is Malcolm Turnbull trying to navigate this very intricate path between trying to get the Australian public on side and trying to pull from that Labor voter base, which is a lot of people said it's very necessary in a campaign to pull from that Labor voter base, at the same time appeasing the traditional voter base and the right of his party. So he's got a lot of people to please.
You know what's interesting is there's a lot of parallels there with the Gillard government. Really, she was in that similar sort of precarious spot where she had, felt like at times hordes of stakeholders to please at all times. Do you think that this is perhaps this Malcolm Turnbull trying to make himself look like a battler? Do you think that this maybe is indicative of a broader Liberal Party sort of attempt to change their own sort of look? Like we had Scott Morrison made a Zoolander gag during the week, which is a little bit out of his wheelhouse.
Yeah, well, I think what we have to remember is that some of these things are definitely scripted and very planned. Some of these things are off the cuff, and I think Malcolm Turnbull is the kind of person that I think it was, again, not to mention Caroline again, but she also made the point that Malcolm Turnbull doesn't really listen to anyone. It's Lucy, and that's about it. So Malcolm Turnbull has his own plan, and he'll be trying to get forward his own agenda. But as I said, he's got a lot of people to please, and it will be...
If he's got a lot of people to please, he can't only be listening to his wife.
Yeah, well, he has people to please, but he has his own strategy for how he's going to go about pleasing them. And Malcolm Turnbull, it's been said, is the kind of person that always looks to see what he can get out of you rather than what you can get out of him. And I suppose that's kind of that background in business coming forward. But
hasn't sort of centralising decision making to the Prime Minister taken down two of our last three Prime Ministers?
Well, in the Abbott government, we saw Peter Credlin and Tony Abbott. That kind of became a bit of a tight knit group, and that caused some issues. But
a tight knit group. But one thing
that Peter Credlin perhaps did quite well was she created a team in that Liberal caucus that could, she created a tight knit unit. Whereas it's been said that by the AFR's deputy editor that Malcolm Turnbull's kind of creating his own little group with really just him, a much smaller...
Surely his plan is, if he wins this election, to break up the power base of the right faction in the party, though, and to try and bring his own...
Well, I'm sure that was Gillard's plan as well. The thing is, with PMs, they often become a faction of their own.
The problem Gillard had was she had a hung parliament. She didn't have any.
She definitely had a lot of deals to make.
She couldn't even put Rudd on the back bench.
Yeah, she had a lot of deals to make. But I guess now that the Labor Party's kind of changed a bit, they've sort of moved to a different model. It's harder to get rid of Shorten than it was to get rid of Gillard, so they're kind of changing. But you are watching or listening to Politics Live. I'm Matthew Elmas, and that's Rudy Edsel. Coming up later, we have a discussion about Nick Xenophon, but until then, maybe we should get on to Labor's costings.
Yeah. I was gonna bring up actually that the Liberal Party, one of their things they're trying to do with this look towards a younger audience, they came out and compared the policy costings to Taylor Swift's 1989 album. They said it had as many photos and as few words as the leaflet for that.
Yeah, well, I did get a chance to read the document. It did have a lot of pictures, and well, it didn't have that many words for for what's known as a costings document. It's 33 pages. You could make the argument that it could have been 5.
New normal, my friend. It's the BuzzFeed.
Yeah, well, maybe they're trying to catch that attention. This this costings document was something that'd be under pressure to release for quite some time. They've been saying for weeks that we're gonna release this. We'll release our costings on this policy, that policy, closer to the election day, and there was even word at some point, a couple of days before they released it, that it would be a week before the budget that they'd release it, and the pressure kept mounting from the coalition and the media, and I think that there was a push at the end. Let's get it out. Let's show people what we're about.
So you're well across the document, obviously having read it or looked at it. Give us the cliff notes. What's the important stuff to note?
Well, I think the general takeaway from the document is that they have committed, or at least they've promised to return the budget to surplus in the same year that 2021 year as the coalition have. But in that document specifically, the projection was that they'd delve into deeper deficits and then the budget would recover almost on a dime, not really on a dime, but it would go deeper and then come back.
So
before that.
significant short-term pain for a long-term gain.
Yeah, I'm not sure pain and gain are the right words, but definitely fiscal expansion in the short term, and then the budget would come back into surplus that way.
Now, will that resonate with the voting public? I can't remember a time in my life when that kind of rhetoric has.
Yeah, well, that kind of rhetoric's definitely very difficult to sell, which might be why Labor have come out today and said that they're actually at 1 p.m. So they're probably making
Right
that
now,
announcement as we speak, that they're going to come up with a bunch of other savings measures, and that will be to try and fix that messaging, because we have a very debt phobia political discourse in Australia and in many other Western countries. And other than the Greens, all the major parties, Labor and Liberal, are committed to that kind of fiscally conservative messaging. So it was definitely going to be hard for Labor to say, look, we're going to expand the deficit in the short term. But from an economics perspective, a lot of economists have said, look, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. That the idea is that you expand, you do fiscal expansion, and then that drives the economy forward, and then that makes it easy to get back to surplus. But I'm not sure within that 5 or 6 year period whether there was too much confidence from economists that would be the case.
Yeah. Okay. So it's been very much a surplus / deficit type of situation. But that's kind of how it always is. Like you said, it sort of dominated the rhetoric a bit. I'm just a bit wary on Labor's behalf. I'd be a bit wary about this. They're going up against the government. They've been pushing towards an election based on economics. The whole, that's clearly their plan.
Yep.
And is this not maybe playing into the Liberal Party's hands?
Yeah, well, I think today those saving measures, it's definitely going to be interesting to see what they're about. We've heard rumblings that they'll include some changes to their higher education policy, which was a little bit expensive. They were going to give a lot of debt-free degrees away to STEM students, and they were going to spend money making it expanding.
STEM?
Science, technology, engineering, and maths, I believe. So, yeah, that's right. So, yeah, they're going to spend a lot of time. They were going to spend a fair bit of money doing STEM degrees or giving away STEM degrees. So we'll see how they change that policy. Obviously, we'll have to check out what that is. But I think that will definitely be an attempt by them to change their messaging and to move back to a kind of messaging that works. But just quickly on the Greens, I think they're the point of difference here, because the Greens have come out and said, look, we don't want to treat debt like Adam Ban said, we don't want to treat debt like a 4-letter word. Let's have
I see that. That's witty because it is a 4-letter word. Very clever.
Well, they're saying, let's have a discussion about debt that isn't surrounded by this, we need to get back to surplus kind of thing. And let's actually think about the world that we want, the Australia we want to leave our children. And so they're taking a very different approach. And I think that's definitely very interesting.
Yeah, it's it's good to at least have another avenue for conversation, I suppose. I mean, I know that the Greens, they probably don't get taken as seriously as they should in the wider electorate, but it's good that someone with some kind of profile is at least trying to drag back the conversation from this sort of really black and white thing.
Definitely.
No economy is black and white.
Yeah, well, and Di Natale came out on Insiders on Sunday, and he was quite clear that, their party was willing to expand the deficit if it meant investing in Australia. And a lot of economists agree. A lot of economists in the United States, prominent economists like Paul Krugman, agree that this approach to the economy is the way we should be going, that when the economy is slowing down, as Australia's, believe it or not, in spite of those optimistic figures a few weeks ago, the economy, is slowing down in the longer term, and that we should be expanding the deficit to invest in Australia and drive growth into the future.
Yeah, I saw figures today claiming that if we don't do something soon to arrest the slide, we'll be trading at 40 cents to the dollar with America. Is that accurate?
Well,
or is that a massive doomsday scenario?
There has been some commentary that the dollar will fall, which I guess a lot of people are saying that a lot of economists are saying that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I think what the Greens are doing is they're really representing a different view. They're representing the view that people like, as I said, Paul Krugman have. that maybe we should be expanding the deficit in the short term. And so it's very interesting to see the Greens come out for a different view. Strategically, it can be quite good for them. They don't have really, they're not a party of government. They don't really need to thoroughly cost all of their policies, and so they can come up more idealistically and take positions on these types of things.
Yeah, speaking of a different view, we've got to talk about the Nick Xenophon factor, which is what you've called the segment here. I would have gone with the Xenofactor, or maybe the X Factor. Come on, Matt.
Yeah, the X Factor. Yeah, I may have been...
I like the Xenofactor.
Yeah, I may have been...
it makes him sound like a superhero.
That may have been a bit of an oversight,
Nick
yeah.
Xenophon.
But
Xenofactor.
Xenophon and independence in general have been very interesting this election. Actually, breaking today, we found out that Rob Oakeshott has actually announced his candidacy for the seat of Cowper. He was an independent in the 2010-2013 Parliament. And he's coming back, just like Tony Windsor. So it seems like after that, what a lot of people have called, and I think it's fair to say maybe a disaster, with the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd government and the independents and that coalition, they've taken the 3 years off and they're coming.
Yeah, let's not editorialize. Gillard passed lots and lots of legislation. So
okay, fine. But yeah, they're coming back in 2016. They're going to try to contest Parliament again. They're going to try to come back as independent. So that's definitely very
A
interesting.
lot of independents perhaps sniffing a balance of power in the lower house here is what you're suggesting.
Well, yeah, it depends on a lot of the composition of the lower house is going to depend on a lot of things. It's going to depend on, for example, whether the Greens pick up a second seat in Batman. It's with Alex Batal. It's going to depend on whether Tony Windsor rolls Barnaby Joyce, which will probably be extremely interesting to see because that is the Deputy Prime Minister, and he's got a real fight on his hands there. And we've also now got Rob Oakeshott, who is going to contest Cowper. So it will be certainly very interesting to see how those independents go.
Was Cowper the seat that he held last time? Yep, sorry.
Technical issues.
Some technical issues there. So, all right, let's narrow the focus a bit. Let's talk about Nick Xenophon specifically. So, the Liberal Party, they've drafted in John Howard to help Jamie Briggs in his seat of Mayo because they are, John Howard came out and he compared Xenophon's some of Xenophon's policies to Pauline Hanson's. Is that right?
Yeah, they've definitely called in the brass. I think the issue is for the Liberal and the Labor Party is that Nick Xenophon's actually polling at 22 to 26%, depending on which polls you read, in South Australia. He's expected now with the Senate voting reforms to turn around 3 to 4 in the Senate in South Australia. And he's at a point now where he can also possibly contest some lower house seats. As in Mayo and even in Port Adelaide, Mark Butlers, who's the Shadow Minister for the Environment. So it's definitely very interesting. And Xenophon is one to watch, and it's definitely going to be interesting to see who else they pull out of the cupboard.
Yes, don't forget that you're listening to Politics Live with Matt Elmas and me, Rudy Edsel. So we've spoken about Xenophon and that he's capturing quite a lot of attention over in South Australia. Is this perhaps a reaction to maybe a little bit of disillusionment with the process as a whole? Like, are people perhaps a little bit burnt out on the Liberal and Labor Party sort of? It feels like almost internecine fighting at times. It's like they're sort of all the same group, squabbling amongst themselves.
Yeah, well, the Coles and Woolies of the messing.
Yeah,
the Coles and Woolies
really
of politics has been prominent from Nick Xenophon's team as well as the Greens lately, trying to attack this duopoly that they're saying is going in the Parliament. And yeah, there are definitely some people, especially in South Australia, that hooked onto that. Nick Xenophon's obviously been quite a popular politician in South Australia for quite a while.
He sort of came from a reaction to the pokies initially, wasn't he? That was his initial sort of
that and manufacturing in South Australia. Yeah. So the Liberal Party have come out and they've attacked Nick Xenophon as protectionist. Believe what you want, but Nick Xenophon definitely denies that, and he's saying that look, he stands for good deals for Australia, and that he stands for things like anti-pokey legislation and things like that. And there's as the polls are showing, there's definitely a good deal of South Australians that are very interested in that messaging.
And there's a bit of a vacuum amongst, in my opinion anyway, there's a bit of a vacuum that will be left behind by almost the dissolution, really, of the Palmer United Party. So it'll be interesting to see what independents really go for it. Like as
Yeah.
you said, Rob Oakeshott, who I've since found out is the previous member for Pine and not Cowper. As obviously they're obviously all scenting a little bit of potential power.
No, it'll certainly be extremely interesting, especially now with the Senate voting reforms that have gone through. People like Nick Xenophon are rather regarded to be beneficiaries of that. And Nick Xenophon's not just contesting Liberal and Labor positions in the Senate; he's contesting a Green seat. He's contesting Robert Sims in that Senate in South Australia as well.
The best bit of branding at this election, by the way, this is a bit by the by, but the best bit of branding at this election is Nick Xenophon calling his party the Nick Xenophon team, so that they can be called NXT. And it looks like a wrestling crew or something. Hashtag NXT.
Yeah, well, they've got that bright orange colouring out there as well, that orange and black. So yeah, you definitely could see it that way. I'm sure there may have been a bit of a strategy meeting going on there.
Nick the People's Elbow Xenophon.
Yeah, well, Nick Xenophon will be dogged just a little bit, though, by revelations about campaign finance reform that it broke a couple of weeks earlier. And I think that kind of stuff has also been dogging the Liberal and Labor Party in the last couple of days, which gets us on to our Dutton of the Week.
Great segue, Matt. Great segue. So we've got the Dutton of the Week, which is our hotly anticipated segment that showcases the week's best gaff, slip-up or gotcha moment. This week's winner is Arthur Sinodinos, who was surprised with questions about his use of taxpayer money to purchase access to a software program that stores and organises data on voters in his electorate.
Do you direct any taxpayer money to it yourself?
Well, I don't know whether it's taxpayer money, but money is provided to them, yes. But as long as it's
But I'm just asking what you've done. Have you used your allowance, your taxpayer-funded allowance?
Well, I'd have to check, but I think I would have, yes.
Why?
I beg your pardon?
Why?
Well, that would be used to provide information on which we gather on electors and the like, and we use it to try and do our electorate business.
All right, and that's a legitimate use of taxpayer allowance?
I'm not quite sure what you're getting at there.
Bit of an embarrassing look for Sinodinos there, Matt.
Yeah, he clearly wasn't ready for that. I guess maybe not a lot of polos would have been. It was a bit left of field for him. It does raise an interesting question at 7:30 around this story last night about the use of these programs. I've talked to a number of staffers that have worked for MPs in electorates around Melbourne, and they were tasked with using this software. I know not just Labor and the Liberals, but full disclosure, the Greens use this software as well. I've seen the Greens using AEC data. I've seen them, compiling profiles on people. All the parties do this. But I think the revelation from the Liberal Party and perhaps the Labor Party as well, haven't seen anyone from there and talk about this yet, so I'm not in a position to say anything about that. But that they're using taxpayer money to pay for these programs is definitely quite an interesting revelation. Also, that the provider of this software is also a big donor to the Liberal Party.
Yeah, it's an interesting little scenario there, and you'd think that you'd hope at least that the Liberal Party would be wanting to get this out in the open as soon as possible to try and stem any particular, to cut off any kind of criticism at the past, perhaps.
Yeah, well, it's certainly curious as well that Arthur Sinodinos was the person that fielded these questions, because Arthur Sinodinos has been a person that's come under scrutiny for his time as the Treasurer in the New South Wales Parliament as well, and what he did there with donations, say what you will about that, but it was certainly interesting, curious at least, that he was the person that was first quizzed on this as well, so more of a setback for him, I suppose.
Yes, indeed. And I think that pretty much does us for this week. I've been Rudy Etzel. I've also been joined by Matt Almus. Hopefully next week we'll have a third
voice
at least. So, we'll see you next week.
All right, see ya.